Hi guys and welcome to Learn FE. My name's Luke Chapman and I am one of the ambassadors here. Today we're out in Start Point in Devon and we're going to take some beautiful landscape photography. As you can see, it's really sunny today, so we're going to pay special attention to our histogram as we want to get the perfect exposure. During this video we're going to be using the How to Use Histogram cheat sheet to help guide us along the way. Why do we need to use the histogram? I like using the histogram for three main reasons. So the reason number one is if you're photographing in bright sunlight, A, you're going to have a really high contrasty image probably with very dark shadows and bright highlights. And it's going to be really hard to see the exposure on the back of your LCD display if it's really bright. Using the histogram will tell you if you've overexposed or underexposed key areas of the scene, so you can post-process it later on when you go back home after taking the shots for that day. The second reason that I like to use the histogram is sometimes you'll have the brightness on your LCD display either too high or too low and you're exposing to the brightness of your LCD display. Well, this could be incorrect, and by using the light meter is a fail-safe way of checking your photos to see if you're over or underexposed an image. And then the final reason that I like to use my histogram is if I want to shoot on a slow shutter speed and I want to have blur or movement within the scene, if it's a bit too bright and I'm struggling, then what I like to do is overexpose an image and check the histogram that I haven't overexposed it by too much. Then I can bring back the highlights in post-production, get a beautifully slow shutter speed and have a perfectly exposed image. So I can use it as a creative tool as well. Now we know why I use the histogram, let's look at how we use the histogram. A histogram is a visual representation of a photo that you've just taken. On the left-hand side of the histogram are the blacks, then you get the shadows, then the mid-tones in the middle, you get the whites, and on the far right-hand side you have the highlights. In essence, if you keep away from the black and the highlights, you'll be able to adjust your image in post-production later on. If you have any pure blacks or pure white, then there's no information there when you're shooting in RAW that you can't post-process that at a later date. But there are two caveats. For instance, if you're doing a low-key image like this black model on a black background, you'll notice that a lot of the histogram is on the left-hand side, and yes, I have pure black, but I don't mind about that because the background I wanted to have is a pure black background. But I just had to check that I had enough detail in the model that I can post-process later. Well, let's have a look at a high-key image. As you can see that the histogram is over to the right-hand side. I've got pure white in the background. Once again, I don't mind this because I wanted pure white in the image as I wanted a white background, but I also have enough information in the model that I can post-process later. So you can see having black and white in an image isn't a problem as long as you want it there. That's the basics of the histogram explained. Why don't we go out now and see if we can find some shots and put it to practice. So we've done the theory now, so let's go and try and find some shots. Now if you look behind me, or look around me, you can see I've got a sea on both sides, and it's absolutely quite spectacular. I'm walking along the ridge now, and I'll end up eventually to the lighthouse. Yeah, I haven't been here for ages, so I can't quite remember what it's going to be like. Ants. A flying ant, lots of bugs here. So yeah, looking really excited to take some shots here. I've just found my first scene, and in this scene I really like the sea, the cliffs coming down into the sea. It's a really raw looking shot. So there's two concepts I have here. The first one is I'm going to use a filter. I'm going to use my 10-stop filter, got a polarizing filter, and I'm going to have a really slow shutter speed. What I'm going to do, just as an experiment and just to show you, I'm going to overexpose the image to get an extra long shutter speed. Now, it might not look too good here, but it's just such a cool technique to use that I just want you to be aware of it. So I reckon that I can get an exposed shot for about a minute. Now, if I do it for a minute and a half, I'm probably going to get a really overexposed shot. What that means is I get another 30 seconds of blur in the scene. Hopefully I can bring it into post-processing, bring the exposure back down and get a perfectly exposed shot with all the information that I need in the scene and get a really punchy shot. So let's give it a go. I've just taken a 37-second exposure and I'm really happy with what the histogram's telling me. I've got all the information that I want in the middle of the histogram, so I've got a very good photo to start working on in post-processing. But what I want to do now is shoot on a much slower shutter speed. So I wonder if I can go down to about 70, 80, 90 seconds. And the reason being is I want much more blur within the scene. So this is using this as a case study. Now, what I want to do is overexpose the image, but not overexpose it where I have no control in post-production. So let's have a much lower shutter speed and see how the histogram looks now. I've just taken my second image and I exposed it for 71 seconds. So I've exposed it for at least 20-30 seconds longer. So that means I've got 20 or 30 seconds of extra movement within the scene. So I'm creating more blur within the scene. Now, the caveat to that is my image is overexposed, but it's fine. I'm happy with that. But when I look at the histogram, I'm not peaking on the right-hand side, which means that I still have information within the entire scene to post-process that and bring all the color and contrast back into the scene to hopefully get a really punchy shot. So I'm really happy with this shot, and let's go and find our next location. As you can see, I'm out in really high contrast sun, so it's going to be really hard to film this. But what I've got is my next shot, and it's a beautiful view overlooking the bay, Start Point Bay, and we've got this lovely curve of the bay, and hopefully that's what's going to be bringing your eye all the way into the picture. Because it's so bright, it's going to be really hard to look at my exposure through the LCD display. The best thing I can do is just use that for composition, and then I'm going to use the histogram to make sure I haven't over or underexposed the shot and I've got a perfect exposure. So let's take a couple of shots now. I've just taken a couple of shots and I'm really happy with the composition, but because it's so bright, it's actually quite hard to see the LCD display in any detail. So what I had to do is rely on my light meter to get a perfectly exposed shot. I've actually had to overexpose by about 1 stop of light to get my light meter in the middle, and actually looking at the shot, it means I've got the most amount of information to post-process now in Lightroom. Right, that's another shot in the bag. I'm going to start making my way over to the lighthouse now to see if we can get some more shots. Just found my next shot. It's the photo of the lighthouse. It's the key shot that I came here to photograph. It's absolutely beautiful. Got beautiful reflection on the sea. The only problem is it's an incredibly high contrast shot. But having said that, it's still definitely worth taking this shot. It's quite interesting really, because I put the light meter in the middle, so theoretically it should be an exposed shot. This is the problem with spot metering on a high contrast day, is depending where you put the spot meter, either in a shaded area or in a highlighted area, it will totally throw off the light meter. So what I did is I checked the histogram, because it's so bright I can hardly see my LCD display, and it's definitely pushing over to the left, and I've got some pure blacks in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overexpose the image by about 2 stops. So I'm just going to adjust the shutter speed, and now I'm down to about 100th of a second. Let's take another shot. Okay, so that's a little bit too much now. So 2 stops is too much. So I'm going to push it down to 1 stop, and let's see what the histogram says now. Okay, perfect. I've got a nice spectrum of color and shading in the scene. That means I've got a really good image now to start post-processing, and it's going to look something like this. That's it today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I've been taking a few photos between my Canon and my Leica, and here's what I got today. Some things to take away from this lesson is that use the histogram on a really high contrast day can be really useful, as you want to have full control within your photos when you post-process them, and the histogram is a great tool to check this. If you like this video, then don't forget to like and subscribe our channel, and we also offer a free photography cheat sheet course, so why don't you check that out now.